Yo guys, what is up? Andy and Dean here, back at you with another episode, episode 107, I believe.
Wait, what?
Today we're going to be talking about a relatively new topic for us. It is the whether to use CO2 in your grow tent, how to use it, when to use it, is it worth it, is it not worth it, and how you can do it at home. Yeah, CO2. What do you think
What
of
spurred
CO2?
this conversation? I think we should talk about first. So I was gifted, or we were sent some samples of a mycelium CO2 generator. It's basically coffee grinds and mushroom spores inoculated into them, and then it over time, as the mushrooms inoculate the the substrate, said to release CO2. Something I haven't ever used before. Something I am using now for the first time to see if it is effective or not. But
I'm busy pulling up a picky in a sec.
It's not my first attempt at using CO2 in cultivating. My first attempt was when I used to do planted aquariums a few years ago, and there weren't many similar to growing. Like the equipment wasn't that heavily imported back then. We don't have a massive creation scene for fish tanking stuff on this side, so you couldn't really get the CO2 generation products or the cheap ones. So we tried, I think it was yeast and water in a Coke container.
Sorry, just for those guys watching, this is just what he was referring to with it's like a bag of mushrooms and it exhales CO2 basically.
Not that one exactly.
Not this one specific. This looks very expensive.
Yeah, I think the retail is around the 500 mark for the one that I'm using.
This is a very popular one in America. Sorry, it's only showing me UK results.
Localized, at least it's showing where it's at. So now this will be my second attempt. Like I was saying, we've tried the yeast and the water and sugar. I think it is in the Coke bottle. Then you lead it via a small straw into another bottle, and that's the regulation bottle, and then it comes out of another straw out of that bottle. Did it work? I saw some bubbles every now and then in the fish tank, bloop, bloop. Stinky as F.
Yeah.
So I also, in a little bit of pre-prep for this video, Andy sent me a video to watch, and the guy was saying the same thing. Him and his dad were doing it back in the day, and it was stanky. So I'm hoping the mushrooms aren't stanky. I don't think they're gonna be. Seems popular. And the cool part about the mushrooms is that it said you can, once it's fully inoculated, you slice them open, squirt in with some water, and then you grow some shiitakes for a snack as well.
Yeah, and then you fry them up and have a have a shiitake fry up.
But so why? I think the first thing we can start off with this conversation is, we've just chatted a little bit about some of the options, chat a little bit more about the options again. But why is outdoors? Let me start there. CO2 is not really necessary because you are in a natural environment outside. We do have less carbon dioxide than we used to have, in the dinosaur period. So increasing CO2 where possible is always effective. But outdoors, you're just gonna be wasting. CO2.
This is purely something indoors.
So indoors, generally, where you're not getting as much CO2 as you are getting outside, you want to start supplementing something. It needs to be a sealed room, because otherwise you're just going to be once again burning off, and it's not going to be doing much effect. And also, the CO2 is heavier than air, so you want to place it above your canopy, not below. So it will sort of shower down onto the plants with the CO2, and to increase your CO2 helps with the plant's photosynthesis. What are the ranges? I'm not 100% sure.
So from what I gathered, it's about 400, 600 ppm during veg, and then sort of 600 to 800, 900 for flower. Seedling is up to 400, 600, 600, 900 is veg, and then 900 to 1,1 is sort of your flowering range. So yeah, basically that's also something to note. It's also, okay, that's how much CO2 you need, and generally there is enough CO2 for your plants just in, like, they're plants. They are going to grow, like, they already are absorbing CO2, and it's not always necessary to supplement them. There are times though when it sort of gets to that point where you need a supplement, but not really all the time. So if you I suppose your first step, right, if you want to find out is CO2 going to be your direction that you want to take, you're going to need to get yourself a CO2 monitoring device, because quite frankly, how are you going to know if it's working, and how are you going to know if it's even necessary without getting some data, monitoring your plants, and not just like a quick reading, like do a cycling data, like you probably need something that can log it, because CO2 changes depending, like the amount dispersed changes depending on whether it's day or nighttime.
And the plants can only receive CO2 in the day, whereas they get the benefits are felt within the plant during the nighttime, but during the daytime is when they would be absorbing their excess CO2. So if you're regulating it, you'd want to put it on more in the day than just burn it off at night. And
at night, the plants actually start, I think it's the plants release a bit of CO2 naturally, and in the day they absorb it and release, they absorb CO2 and release oxygen, and at night I think it's switched around where they release oxygen and absorb the CO2. When at night they aren't absorbing any CO2, they're absorbing oxygen and releasing CO2 at night. That's why a lot of sort of the big growers, I know in Switzerland they were doing that. They basically had your two chambers, and when the one's nighttime and the one's daytime, they basically funnel some of the air. So you're kind of using your existing plants as generating, as sort of a source of CO2 for your other chambers.
Wow, that's interesting.
It may have been a bit complicated, of an explanation, but that's sort of what I because CO2 is not a cheap thing to get into.
So I always say to guys on the grow shop, first get your other parameters right, your light, your nutrients, your soil, and then come to CO2. It is something important, but it's not something you're worrying about, maybe in your first 2 grows, 3 grows, 4 grows. It's something you start worrying about when you want to finesse a little bit later and push yields in your current space and with the equipment that you've had, So first get comfortable with everything before you start worrying about CO2, because, you can go for the al cheapo method of some yeast and some sugar and whatever. You can maybe go for one of the mushroom generators, but on a more stabilized level, you're going to start looking at more. The price tag just goes through the roof when you start looking at the alternatives. The higher alternatives.
Sorry, my green screen's being being a green screen and just going wherever it wants to go. But yeah, that's basically the thing. Because are they even worth it? Like the little ones. I mean, to be honest, from the research I've done, like, okay, they're worth it if you're putting it in there, and you get some mushrooms at the end of the day. But for the cost, I mean, already I think so. Those bags are like $500. They have a short shelf life. They are worth it. I've seen a lot of.
I can't test, so I'll be able to test.
The people who have tested seem to be saying it's a very small increase, and it can't hurt. But the thing is, most of the time, guys, your plant's limiting factor in growth isn't the CO2 in the room. it's probably one of the last possible limiting factors. So I mean, like, your most obvious one is probably going to be lighting. Like, water is, I suppose, the first limiting factor. It's the easiest one to overcome. As long as you give your plants enough water, they'll grow. But past a certain point, it's not doing anything.
I think is huge. You know,
yeah.
A lot of the time, you might want to maximize your light spread first before moving up a level.
And your especially against your lighting. So anything above 1,000 par ppfd on a, you know, in your grow room, is a waste, essentially, because it's not, your plants then need more CO2 to be able to transform. That's when CO2 really becomes a limiting factor. So if you are growing above 1,000 ppfd in your or par in your tent, then you're probably going to need to introduce some CO2. And generally, you're not going to really even want to do that, because it's not, like they even say that the amount of extra growth you're getting after that point isn't that much. It's sort of what the guys do when they really want to, like, it's like it might be, look, they're still doing tests, they're still doing research, and maybe they will prove that is the most efficient way to grow. But generally, it's the guys that want to grow, like, they just want, like, these, like, super nugs and
triple A grade. That's like on the commercial level where you've
and
got
they just
all
want the most yield possible
I think if you've ticked all
for the
other
space.
Boxes and you're looking to go for those percentiles, you know, on a high level, then it makes sense. But a lot of the time in the home growing front, you know, there's so many other factors that can be improved on.
Like, come on, if someone said to you, if they go the route in South Africa and they say, cool, you can only have 4 plants per person. I mean, okay, 4 plants, but I'm going to make damn sure that those 4 plants are like these, like, mutant psycho, like, beast plants, you know, god mode tier plants, you know, cranking like CO2 into them, and just like, I don't know, you know, whatever you're gonna do to. And I think that's kind of where this is all stemmed from. I mean, it's all part of the whole, like, unnatural world of sort of super crops, because of the prohibition and how they, you know, drove the THC part up. But anyway, we had to talk about CO2. So you've got the small generators, like the mycelium bags and stuff like that, and then basically I think your next step thereafter, or like you said, the yeast and water, bicarb and lemon,
that's numero uno. Then I'd say there's the mycelium.
Then that's a bit more sophistication level goes like this, and it's par with the price level as well.
And then you get to the upper echelon, which is, I suppose the first one would be tanks.
Tanks is the next thing after, which I think if I was personally was going to do it, I would go for a tank straight off the bat.
I'll tell you why.
Yeah,
because they get the tank. The tank is nothing without a regulator, and a CO2 regulator is like a tiny little gas thing you'd put on the end of your tank, and you say, okay, cool, this is how much CO2 I want released into my space. And then if you've got the tester, boom, you now all of a sudden have full control over what level.
I think the regulators, some of them actually have like a device, like a manual device. I don't know. No, that can't be possible. Is it they are normally electronic regulators connected to a device that can measure, and when it goes below a certain point, it pumps in some CO2.
I think a basic one would just be at a level, and then obviously you could go higher. You probably at the end get like an Arduino unit that like is plugged up to the regulator that's like reading all the parameters, you know. But
you would have to,
I would probably go for that. Like in the fish, you know, like I said, my experience in the CO2 seems a bit more in the fish tanking game. But on that side, it was for the big scapes and the show scapes and whatever. It was the main thing that people would use. But I suppose that's because you can pump it. Whereas when we were doing research for this episode, there was one new one that I hadn't heard about before, and that was the CO2 burner, I think they called it.
Yeah, like getting a burner, and it's like basically it's just like a fucking unit that makes it. I think what it does is it takes you fill it up with water, and it through electrolysis it's got 2 probes and it runs electricity through the water, and it kind of separates
it. Rains it down.
It separates it from, because water's H2O, and they somehow make it like CO2. So there's probably some I don't know, some chemical reaction with water that turns water into CO2, I think.
Very exciting. Yeah, so the text
Basically.
there seems to be solid tech in
That was a bit of a thumbs up, eh?
We're open to comments on that final one.
But we know it's expensive, and we know it works. And look, I think a lot of the big growers have generate burners, and a lot of the big growers have tanks. It's not that they're using them all the time, but if they do sort of get to a point where they're lacking in that, it's going to be on hand. And if you're... Look, I think if you've got a 4-plant tent or something like that, look, you're not getting the best value for it. Maybe put in a couple hanging things, this and that. But I think where your value is going to come in is when you sort of go into a grow room, I suppose past probably 2.4, 2.4, 5 sort of spaces and up. I think that's when you need to start. But by then, your budget's looking a little bit more
healthy. Yeah, like I said, my opinion still, I think it's one of those things that when you've reached the top level, then you start to look for alternatives to push those percentiles. In the home grow space, I personally have spent time concentrating on other things to improve over my grow career, over looking to CO2 consistently. It is something I'm looking more to now that I've reached this level, but still there's other things I'm looking to improve first.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, guys, we deal with clients all day, every day, and I've never really recommended to anyone. I've never been like, oh, CO2 is your problem, bro. It's probably also, unless the guy comes, they just generally, they've probably got a meter and then they know CO2 is their problem, but it's never really the problem off the bat. So if you're getting shit yields, it's not
Maybe it's time
CO2.
to get a new grow light.
Yeah, get an E500 or two, and a good system. Get your ventilation right, your negative pressures. Get all of those things going. Get good airflow. Clean up all your, get good nutrients. Toss your soils. Make sure everything's clean, hygienic. Use gloves and stuff. Well, not gloves, but clean your hands before you go in your tents. All of those things are much bigger. Get good genetics. Bigger problems then a bit of a, maybe your CO2 is only at 800 ppm and you want to be hitting that mythical 11 ppm or whatever, and also you're measuring it at one point in the day. You need to log it, because at night it might be, it might be up, it might be different.
And also you could be...
CO2 is heavier than air, so it sinks to the bottom. So if you measure at the bottom of the top, and is it the canopy, is it not?
And it could just be getting sucked out of your grow room as well.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing. You spend all this money generating CO2, and then you turn your fan on and you're just you're just extracting, money's just bellowing out of your tent. So yeah, you got to think about it carefully. But we're just here to give you the advice, that a bit of guidance on it. Maybe we'll try to get a pro to come in and school us a bit on these sort of things. But all in all, I think that pretty much wraps up the epi. We've already hit 19 minutes, so make sure to like and subscribe if you made it to the end, and sign up for the email newsletter in the description below. We've got some Amazon links if you're in the States for some mycelium generators and things like that, which you guys can also check out. And that's about it. That's a wrap.
Till next time, guys.
Peace.
Peace.